It's time for my big opinion. Now, I'm not surprised when anyone wants to flee France. Who could blame them? But illegal migrant crossings in the Channel are more than just a crisis. That's not a big enough word. They are an economic, humanitarian and national security emergency. It's an economic emergency given the spectacular cost of accommodating people who are here illegally. Hotels, spending money, and of course, the long-term cost of housing, medical treatment, education, and other public services. Not easy, particularly if there are language and cultural issues, which in many cases there will be. The bill for accommodating these people who cross the Channel illegally is not just a financial one, but a societal one too. That costly, complex, and long-term challenge of integration is only justified, in my view, for those who genuinely seek asylum from a tyrannical regime, not from the uncaring French. For those who genuinely require shelter, safety, and a better life, it's essential that Britain is a welcoming country, as we always have been, to those who, in many cases, literally fear for their lives. And history shows the contribution of those who come to our shores can be colossal. But for political reasons, the French seem to be deliberately encouraging the situation at the moment, with no serious effort to stop boats leaving their shores, in spite of the 54 million quid that we've paid for them to do just that. In my view, President Macron has weaponised the situation in order to be seen to make the British suffer, and of course, to punish us for Brexit. Now, this guy clearly doesn't lose any sleep over Britain's suffering, societal, security and economic pain. But he also doesn't seem to have much human empathy whatsoever, because the situation in the Channel is also a humanitarian emergency, with 27 souls having lost their lives this week. That is 27 human beings. I fear more lives will be lost if things don't change, and change fast. If Macron really cared about this tragic situation, the last thing he would do is allow the cancellation of a meeting between our Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and her opposite number in Paris. With their failure to act and properly engage in this situation, the French could potentially have blood on their hands if they don't already. It reminds me of the time when Macron proudly announced that the AstraZeneca vaccine didn't work that well. Again, just another example of Britain bashing at the expense of lives. Days after those comments, thousands of Oxford AstraZeneca vaccines gathered dust in French laboratories, and take-up of AstraZeneca never fully recovered in France or elsewhere on the continent. In terms of illegal crossings, the numbers are eye-watering. At least 26,000 people have already crossed the Channel illegally this year already. It was a fraction of that just 2 years ago. Over 1,000 people crossed the Channel on one day earlier this month on the 11th of November. And the situation is a humanitarian emergency too, because people are not only dying, but they're being exploited by wealthy gangsters, taking thousands of pounds to send them on this treacherous route. Now, many want to see a new infrastructure in the Channel, which guarantees safe passage for all incoming boats. Now, I can see their points, but that would be Christmas coming early for these evil criminals who would recruit thousands more to take this perilous journey. What's happening in the Channel would go from being a business, as it currently is, to an industry. The moral case for ending this business model couldn't be stronger. 27 lost souls should be intolerable to all involved, and the ultimate argument to make this stop. But added to that, what about the thousands of people who have a valid legal claim to seek asylum in this country? What about their human rights? At the moment, they go to the back of the queue by following the rules. So we should beef up and speed up our protocols to welcome and accommodate people who seek asylum legally. But we must end what is essentially human trafficking for all the rest. So this is an economic emergency, a humanitarian emergency, but it's a national security emergency too. Some of the people crossing the Channel may have valid claim to seek refuge in Britain, But why do some dump their documentation, bank cards and mobile phones into the water as they travel across? Why do some cover their faces or even run for the hills on arrival? If they have a valid claim, you have to ask why they would chuck their documents in the water. But either way, this is not how a modern democratic country like the United Kingdom is supposed to do things. If you enter Britain, we need to know your circumstances. We need to know who you are and what your background is. That's not unreasonable. And your right to stay must be assessed in accordance with the rules. Good luck trying to enter China, North Korea or Russia illegally. Or Australia, for that matter, who ended the problem overnight by crushing the gangster business model. If you go to Australia illegally, you will not receive asylum. End of. And the national security emergency is a huge one, as Dan Wootton, my brilliant colleague, pointed out in his Mail column this week. It was the current chaotic system, writes Dan, that allowed the Liverpool bomber Emad al-Swayalmin to illegally remain in the country for 7 years, working on the side to fund a bomb factory before he blew himself up outside Liverpool Women's Hospital on Remembrance Sunday. Now, hopefully this monster is in the minority, but without proper systems, we cannot be sure. Which takes us to Boris. Any Prime Minister's main role is to keep order at home and protect our borders from foreign threat. At the moment, the Prime Minister and Priti Patel are failing to do both. Not helped by French President Emmanuel Macron, who, frankly, in my view, wishes ill upon this country. His government didn't like the fact that the Prime Minister put the government's proposed migrant action plan with France on Twitter. So he threw his toys out of the pram. Mr. Macron, grow up and grow a pair. Use your brain and have a heart. I'll be honest, there's guilt on both sides. Political weakness and ineptitude in Westminster, and downright obstruction in Paris. It's a perfect storm. Emmanuel Macron will continue to leverage this crisis for his own political ends because it makes him look like the tough guy. So the ball is firmly in Boris Johnson's court to get this sorted. He's going to have to act tough and demonstrate in this situation that he's more Winston Churchill than Neville Chamberlain. He got Brexit done, and I have always saluted him for Freedom Day on the 19th of July. Cases, hospitalisations and deaths have fallen, and we are the envy of Europe. But this is his biggest crisis since COVID. If he doesn't get to grips with it, there won't be a second term in power. National security is a huge issue for you, the British people. So when it comes to the economic, humanitarian and national security emergency playing out in the Channel, it's now or never for Boris Johnson. This is GB News.